All right, so the purpose of this little quick video today is to talk a little bit about a design of experiments. I'm not going to talk a ton about it. Um, it's the idea if you're running an experiment, how you're going to set things up, and it will depend on what you're trying to do. So, for instance, if you were trying to decide, let's say you're back in grade school and you're doing a science fair project, and so you're going to grow corn. And so you start them all. These little, no, that's going to be hard to stand up straight. You start all these little containers at the exact same way. They got a little corn sticking out there. Okay. So you want to know if temperature matters. So you're going to say temperature one way, like so. And so maybe you're going to grow them at 50 degrees, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you want to know if there's a difference between those two things. Why just 2 levels, Jay? Why not 3? You can do as many levels as you freaking want. I just stuck with 2 today. Now, you might also want to test fertilizer. So, and maybe 2 levels of fertilizer. So maybe you're going to use Miracle Grow. And the Walmart brand. Okay. So you put a bunch of plants in here, a bunch of them. How do I decide which one goes where? Totally random. Totally random. Let's say I've got 160 plants to pair up in these 4 boxes. I'm totally going to do it randomly. That's it. That's all. So, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. If you think about this, it's a captured groupings. So you would use random selections. In other words, this would be plant number 1. You would select, okay, number 1, you're going into the Miracle Grow 60 degrees. Okay. Next one I pull out, okay, you're also going there, and so on and so on and so on. That's how that would work out. Now think about what that is going to do for us here. When you analyze this, and we're not going to analyze it in 361, but in 362 we would analyze data from this data set. Think about this. There's going to be what we would call a fertilizer effect. And to me, this is just kind of setting the stage, but it's also talking more about sampling. So a fertilizer effect, in other words, is there a difference between the 2 fertilizers? Right? Cool. And then, of course, you're going to have a temperature effect. And, of course, does temperature effect. Now, what are we measuring? I'm just going to go with height, if that's okay with you. But you could do yield, you could do whatever, and see what's up. So, in other words, is there a difference between fertilizers in terms of heights? Is there a difference in temperature that affects height? Okay. Let's see, what else could you have? Oh, yeah. You have a cute little thing called interaction. What does that mean? Well, it's like this. If you've ever watched a football game, baseball game, any kind of game, basically, in there will be a Viagra commercial. And it'll say, do not take, blah, blah for blood pressure if you take Viagra. Or don't take Viagra if you take these for blood pressure. And why is that? Well, because Viagra was developed to reduce your blood pressure, and it does a fabulous job of that. The only problem is it had a weird side effect, so it was a very marketable side effect. So that's why they sell it the way they do. And now it has an oddball side effect of lowering your blood pressure. Okay? So Viagra by itself will not kill you. Your blood pressure medicine by itself will not kill you. Together, you're deader than a mackerel. Same thing when you go to bed at night. If every night you go to bed, you take a big glass of Jack Daniels. Yeah, I can't sleep good. Wash it down. Good for you. Okay, you might have a problem. If you decide, hey, listen, I'm going to take a sleeping pill tonight. Hey, that's no problem. If you decide to wash your sleeping pill down with your Jack Daniels, you're not getting up tomorrow. Okay, because that's what we call an interaction term. When you go to the pharmacy, the pharmacist will say, what other drugs are you on? What are they looking for? They're looking for an interaction. They know that if you take the pill that you just got prescribed, you're fine. They know that the other pills you've been prescribed are obviously fine, or they wouldn't prescribe them to you. However, this pill and the other pill might interact and kill and hurt you. So, in other words, it's interesting that if this were true, For instance, a Walmart brand might work better at a lower temperature. You see what I'm saying? Might work better at lower temperature and worse at higher. In other words, there could be some kind of a situation like that. Now, you don't expect that with fertilizer. I don't either. So in this case, you might see when we analyze data on this, you might say, hey, there's no interaction at all. That's totally fine. Again, the reason I bring this up, you've got these, let's say, 160 corn plants over there. How are you going to assign them? You're going to assign them randomly because, once again, this is a captured group. And so you're just randomly selecting. You already know their numbers. Okay. Another design is what is referred to as the Factorial Design. This is one where if you have tires, you want to test them out. Let's say you have the hand kooks and some BFGs. Well, that's enough. I don't want to do this all night, okay? So if you have those two kind of tires and you want to test them, which one's better? Well, someone will come along and go, well, doesn't it depend on how you drive it or what you put it on? Oh, yeah, probably. So like family car, sports car, SUV, whatever, truck. Well, it matters. And you're right, it does totally matter. So then you're like, all right, cool. So then someone might say, well, let's put, maybe, and let's actually do that. Maybe let's get 4 kinds of tires. Let's do the Schwabs. Let's Schwab. And let's do, come on, Jay, you can do it. Firestone. There you go, sure. You could say, here's your truck. Okay, and you could put on the front corner here a Hankook. On the other corner over there, you can put a BFG. On this back corner on the back side, this is the Schwab. And then the Firestone right here. Well, interestingly enough, your back tires might take a little more beating in this pickup because it's rear-wheel drive. And so you might be testing how long or how durable these treads are, but in fact, if you tested it this way, you'd be like, wait, this is no good. If I did it this way, I'd have the Firestone and the Schwab would tend to look bad because this guy's going to be burning these tires off as he's accelerating and stuff. If you put it on this, if you had more of a sports, well, let's just do a family car. This front-wheel drive. The front-wheel drive cars are going to tend to wear the front ends harder, the front tires harder. And so those two are going to look bad. So what ends up happening in the Factorial Design is this, is that you make sure you account for every single position on every single car with every single tire. And so you're like, wow, that's a lot of difference. It is. So what will typically happen is you will run, say, 4 SUVs with 4 tires, 4 with each with 4 different tire brands. Now you're like, wait, 4 different SUVs, isn't that going to also be a problem? Probably not. Let's say if they're all Ford Explorers, it's probably going to be the same. So what some people might do is, if I'm worried about brand of SUV hurting it, I would just do 4 trials with the same SUV. And what we end up doing in that case is you'd end up what we call blocking for the SUV factor because we accounted for that. We said, listen, we're going to use the same SUV, so you can't come crying to us that, well, if you hadn't used it on the stupid Explorer, then it wouldn't have been a problem. My hand kooks would have performed better if you'd used a GM product or some stupid thing. Okay? And so that's often what will happen. They'll do 4 trials with the same SUV. Or more likely they'll just get 4, like I say, 4 typical SUV, let's say a Ford Explorer, and they'll just do it like that. Okay? And then, of course, they'll do 4 the same basic thing with the family car. Same thing. Okay? And then, of course, what I said the other one was trucks, right? No, SUVs, I guess, right? No, that was SUV. This is trucks down here. Okay, same thing. Now, then someone might say, well, wait, you only ran 1 set of tires. Oh, then you're like, wait, what if I just got a bum set of tires? Like I bought a set of hand kooks when they first came over here in it was like 98. It was like 98 because it was right when we moved here. And those things were just junk. They like fell off the tire. They basically fell off the car. It was pathetic. I won't buy another set of them, even though now I hear that they've made a lot of strides. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that again. One bad apple can really hurt the whole thing. And so typically you're like, wait, should I do more with this? Well, yeah. Here's the problem. At some point, what's going to happen? If you're Consumer Reports, you have to get your hands on 4 SUVs, 4 family cars, 4 trucks. Okay, number one. Then you have to get your hands on, there's 16 sets of tires here, right? That's 16 tires, 4 different sets. 4 of the Hankooks, 4 of the BFGs, 4 of the whatevers. And there's 16 more and 16 more. And you're like, wait, 16 plus 16 plus 16, that's 48 tires. That's only one set of Hankooks on a family car. You're like, should we do multiple trials? That is the whole thing in life. To keep this in mind, that whenever you're making a snap judgment based on a small percentage or a small sample size, weird things can happen. Not to discount women's intuition, because that's a real thing, and I know not to argue about it anymore. I don't even question it anymore. But aside from that, if you meet someone and the first time you meet them, you kind of draw a conclusion about them, you're likely wrong. Okay, it happens so often. Someone will judge somebody, and here I'm not trying to be all touchy-feely at all, but I remember this one boss. She came in, and I was late, like a minute late to a meeting because I was in another meeting, and she freaked out on me, and I'm like, "Are you serious right now?" The first time I ever meet her, she's yelling at me. Okay, yeah, you better never be late to meet him. I'm like, yeah. That was like, I go, yeah. That was when I've maybe been sales 10 years. Yeah, so that's 10 years and I'm late for one meeting, and that's the only one you've ever seen. Sounds like a great thing to judge me on, kid. And walked away. What an idiot. Anyways, you have to be careful of that. Okay? Now, so in a real study, you'd want to do replication upon replication upon replication upon replication. Now, interesting to note, that's not what Consumer Reports does. Okay? They don't do a ton of replication like that. They would do a block design like this, and they would say they'd give you a report for the tires as reported on the SUVs, and then they do it for the cars, and then do it for the light trucks perhaps, and then you could make your decision. Guarantee they're testing like what 20 brands of tires. They only use one set of those per tire. Remember, Consumer Reports' whole big deal is they buy all of those tires. Think about that for a minute. If you're buying Hankook tires, let's just hypothetically say here, for an SUV, you're talking $180 tires a piece, probably. So say $700, $800. You're into those $800 probably for a set of tires for just the Hankooks. And if you're running 20 sets, you're like, well, that's $16,000 just for the one set of each brand of tire, just for the trucks. And then you get to do it again. Okay, that's crazy. Okay, and so just be aware of that. Be a little bit aware of that. Now, Consumer Reports does a fabulous job of taking care of that. Some people might also realize when you're doing these experiments, it doesn't matter who's driving the car and who's driving the truck. It kind of does. So when they go out and test them, do they ride them a lot harder than you would on the street? Probably. But they're trying to actually see what the wear is going to be like. They're not being light on them. But if you had 2 or 3 drivers, it could be a situation where this one driver is just not running it as hard as the rest of them. And so his tires seemingly last longer. What you're not seeing is you're not seeing a tire effect. You're seeing a driver effect. So in this situation here, let's just say there's just the one driver. In this case, you'd have a tire effect. You'd have a car effect. And you'd have a position on car effect. Now, we got rid of the position on car effect by putting all of the tires on all the way around each car. And so that's what you've got it down to. And if you use the same driver, then you don't have a driver effect. But if you allow different drivers, you have a driver effect. Okay. Now, interesting to note, in this case, how do I go about doing this? Well, I go about doing this. The random part of this is that when I go to buy tires, I go down to my local tire factory and I say I take 4 of those, 4 of those, 4 of those, 4 of those, and 4 of those, and 4 of those. Okay? That's the random part of it. They came off an assembly line somewhere in China. They were shipped here, and they were randomly shipped to your local tire factory. And then they send some flunky in the back to bring out 800 tires for you. There's a lot of random in that deal. Okay, no one was picking the best tire for you or the worst tire for you. It's just completely random. Now, how that goes on each truck, well, in this case, again, we are putting all of the tires on all of the cars on all of the positions. So the randomness part was how they were selected to start with. Okay, and so that's classic example of a factorial design. But again, it's that idea of when we take a sample, how are we doing that? Okay, one more thing about this is back to this corn plant one. Okay, or well, I shouldn't do corn. I'll do a similar deal. Back on the farm, we used to run trials out in the fields, right? The company would come by and they'd run samples. And we grew canola. They were constantly doing canola trials in our fields. Okay? If you've never seen this stuff, well, let's get a picture for you. If you've never seen canola growing out in the field, it's pretty sweet. Canola. Come on. What are you doing? Canola. By the way, it's interesting. Canola, the plant, or canola, the oil, that's what it looks like. Also known as rapeseed, this is what it's called, which I always found off-putting. It's pretty tall, can be anywhere up to 5 feet taller sometimes. It's pretty crazy stuff. These are the tiny little seeds that it is, and they, oops, not that, dummy, not that. And they grind them down, get the oil out of them. Yeah, they're tiny little buggers. But you come in, they do a canola trial. Okay, and so if you were trying to make your trial look good, if they were trying to make this plot here look good, because that's their new seed versus their old seed, they would come in and they would pick, I want this plant, this plant, this plant, the big tall plants, perhaps, or the ones that, whatever, had the most seed pods on them. And they pick the worst ones down here, and that's not how we want to do it. This is where you would come into random sampling. How would you do this? Okay, and so what a lot of them would do is they would take things like this. This is an example of stuff I've seen happen in these deals. They would like roll a dice or pick a random number somehow or another, and I don't know the exact way to do it, but pick a random number. And so maybe this is a 200-foot long trial. Maybe they picked the number 132, so they'd come down here to 132. And then maybe they'd picked another number, 27. So they'd come into the field down 27, and they would take all of the plants in, let's say, a foot-by-foot region or a yard-by-yard region. And then they would go and do it again, maybe take another box in here somewhere. They do the same thing on this trial down here. That is an example. That's not the only way it's done. Again, it's just an example. What are you doing? You have a captured group of things, but there's literally millions of plants in this patch. So they don't all have numbers on them. They don't have names. So instead, basically, you're naming them by saying that you're in the 132nd foot over and 27 feet down. I'm going to take all the plants in that box. That's an example. It's not the only one. Okay? And so that's where random sampling would come about in that case. Another one that kind of, when I was a kid, I didn't understand this at all. When I was a kid, on the farm, they would come out every year from the government and they would check your fields, and here's your dirt just in your field there. And they would check to see how much straw and roots and garbage, organic debris was sitting on top of the field. And if you didn't have enough sitting on, by the way, sitting on top is not doing anything to control moisture, okay? Keep it in the earth. That's helping, but not as much as if it's actually, incorporated in the top 3 or 4 inches. But whatever. I don't want to argue about it. Anyways, they would come out and they would measure, quote unquote, measure how much stuff was on the surface. And what they would do, and this is looking down from above, they would take a rope and they'd throw it out like this. And this rope would have knots every foot or 2 feet, or I forget what it was. It was a goofiest looking thing. And this is before I knew anything about statistics. Okay? And before they throw it out, they'd say, we're going to count the ones that touch the left side of the knots. So they would throw it out, and you'd see pieces of straw doing this number, and you'd see some of this action, and some of this business, some of this action. Now, if you weren't in compliance, you could lose some money, you get penalized, whatever. It's a mess. Again, the guy said, maybe this time, he said, I'm going to do left sides. So he comes along and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He counted 11 pieces of straw touching knots on this side of the rope. My dad goes, "What about these, dude? What about those?" "Ooh, yeah. I said I was going to count the left side of the knot." Okay. My dad goes, "The hell difference does it make? It's the same thing. It's still straw." "No, we only count the left side." You know what those guys couldn't tell me? They couldn't tell me back then what they were doing. I'll tell you what it is right now. It's called systematic sampling. By telling myself ahead of time I'm only going to count on the left side of the rope, then I am not going to be biased when I throw it out there and go, "Oh, crap, the right side's better. I'm going to count the right sides." Or I'm going to count this one because there's a lot. I'm going to count this one because there's a lot. I'm going to count this one because I'm going to count this one because there's a lot, and make it look really good for this farmer, or count all the crappy ones and make this farmer look bad, get him in trouble, get him punished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be systematic about it. And that's why that guy would say things like this time, or he'd flip a coin and if it hits tails, he's going to count left sides or whatever. The idea was a way to eliminate bias. Okay, now I've seen other things like this in the real world, but these are the ones that kind of stuck with me over the years. I remember this one when I was a kid. I did not understand statistics back then. And it was funny because the guys that were doing it didn't understand it either. They couldn't explain to you why. Our bosses told us to do this. Well, the reason they told you to do that is because it eliminates bias from the process. Okay? So I hope that helps. Mostly it was just mostly this was a learning session this evening. You will not be quizzed on experimental design. We will hint at it. We will talk about it more going forward. The reason I wanted to talk about it a little bit tonight was to talk more about where the sampling would come from. Okay? And that's kind of a big deal to me. Okay? Sampling is huge. When people talk about sampling, people always think, well, you mean I got to call people and ask them if what's their favorite kind of Oreos or something? No, nobody cares about that. Well, what do you mean? Well, I'm saying I have a warehouse full of Budweiser, and I need you to go select some cases of that stuff. Where would I do it? You know, how would I do it? How would I select it? Would I do it by case, by pallet number? You know, however I would do it. And those are the things you want to think about. Okay? So I hope that helps, and cool.